There's a lot of reaction to the reaction, I think, more than anything else. Not just to the 12 teams that are in the playoff, which we now know.
Yep.
But I've got a ton of reactions to people's reaction to what happened. And I'm talking about people that are inside of this thing, too. ADs, coaches, media analysts
those who
across
voted on
ESPN.
This, you're saying. Yeah.
People that voted on it, people on the committee. A lot of thoughts.
Well, the College Football Playoff Committee, here's the bracket that they put together. The final bracket that's been announced. Clemson, of course, they're in after the big win over SMU. Some really solid games from a couple of conferences over the weekend, Chad. Tennessee.
By the way, Clemson, Texas.
Texas.
That's going to be one of the TNT games.
Yep. And Tennessee, Ohio State, the marquee matchup, which will be on Saturday night on ABC in prime time. SMU, Penn State, the other TNT game that goes head-to-head with the NFL. And Notre Dame, Indiana, it was a foregone conclusion. ESPN, ABC, they have a Notre Dame home game that can be broadcast on something other than NBC for the first time in decades. That's live on Friday night, December 20th. So that's your opening round. And you can see how it progresses through the first round buys, which we'll get to in a moment. It doesn't stack up with where we actually have the teams ranked from this committee. It's because the format has the automatic qualifiers, automatic buys from the 4 highest ranked conference champions, and then 1 at large. Here's the final college football playoff rankings. Oregon and Georgia. Texas falls 1 spot. Penn State, they jump up. Notre Dame is the 5. Were they the 5 last week? No, they were the 4. Penn State jumps up 1 spot. Notre Dame in the 5. Ohio State and Tennessee, right where they were.
6-7.
Indiana, Boise State, SMU, and Alabama, plus Arizona State. Alabama is in the top 12, according to the committee. They are one of the 12 best teams in college football. But they're out because, well, the automatic qualifiers in the first round buys. Arizona State put on a show in the Big 12 championship game. And, well, Clemson, well, they're Clemson. They haven't lost that championship in the ACC in years when they've played for it. Chad, overall, I don't have a ton to complain about. It's the format, though, that we knew was coming. We knew about this with the first round buys and the system. It's a flawed system. We knew it was flawed. But actually seeing it in action, seeing it play out with this bracket, one thing I didn't take into consideration, the fact that teams were going to benefit from losing on conference championship weekend. Penn State was rewarded. As we look at, we'll show the bracket. Bracket, as it plays out, they have a nice path to the semis if they want it. They will take on SMU, and if they win, they get Boise State because you don't reseed. I don't like the way this is set up, given the fact that there are far better teams, just man for man, better teams than the teams that are getting the first round buys. And Penn State has an easier path than Oregon, who beat them in Indianapolis.
It's not just Penn State, too. It's both losers in the 2 biggest conferences that get a real big benefit here. Texas is the 5 seed playing Clemson. Clemson's not a great team. Clemson plays great in big moments, and maybe they rise up again in this playoff. But then to get Arizona State, no disrespect to Arizona State, but of the teams left in the playoff, that's a favorable draw. Clemson, Arizona State, 1 game at home, 1 on a neutral field for a chance to get to the semis. Great news for Texas. And James Franklin may be the biggest winner of yesterday with this draw, getting SMU at home in a probably freezing cold game in that thick grass they play in Happy Valley. Going to slow everything down, slow a fast team down. They win that game, they're going to get Boise State, who I watched pretty much all of their game Friday night. Was not that impressed with, other than Ashton Genty.
Yeah, and I mean, they've played some tight games throughout the season, as has everyone.
So huge winners, Penn State and Texas, and all of this. And the toughest one is the number one team in the country.
Yeah.
As a reward, you're going to get the winner between Tennessee and Ohio State. And that is the game, Hutton. If I'm picking one and saying early games, which team could win and go the distance from a difficult spot, it's the 8-9 game. I could see either Tennessee or Ohio State making a run in this thing and playing for a national title.
There's good and bad with all this. There's a lot of bickering and complaining about the college football playoff. And I thought that I was on with Dan Dockett on Don't At Me earlier today. I thought he had a great point. The College Football Playoff Committee is almost looked upon as the NCAA now. They're the new NCAA. But the good here is there is far less Bama bias than we thought. And it made for historical seasons for more programs and more fans, including newcomers to conferences. Arizona State, they come in. They win the conference. They're picked dead last. Texas, they come in. They play for the SEC championship. Great. SMU, they're in the college football playoff in year one of the ACC after taking far less and no payouts from the ACC for 10 years? 9 years. Alabama being out of the playoff, though, brings up the bad for me. This will take away one great aspect of the season that I loved. No more home and home agreements like Alabama, Wisconsin, Texas, Michigan. We can continue on that list. Tennessee, NC State. Those are far less likely than an SEC program adding more. And if you take a look around at the teams that are doing it, it's the top shelf teams that are actually going on the road and playing out of conference opponents like this. It's not as much the teams on the bubble because they can't afford the loss and they knew it. You're not being rewarded for your schedule, though. Bryant-Denny Stadium should just call MTSU, Middle Tennessee State University, and say, welcome home. You're back on the schedule. You're going to be the fourth team that we're going to play in late November for homecoming. It's all because the ACC wins. They just mean more. And you factor in a lot of different aspects of however you want to pick it apart. I don't have a huge problem with SMU getting in, but I have a problem with the system that's flawed that they sat in a room and came up with. Because the fact that Boise State sits there with a bye, and the committee's telling us where they're ranked. Clemson's 14th or 16th in the country, and they're in, and Alabama's out, but they're ranked 11th. It's not mind-boggling because we knew the setup, but as it's played out, it's hard to see for teams that were more deserving. But again, it's not about most deserving. The committee's just sitting there putting this bracket together as they're told to put it together. They're told to pick the top 25 teams in America. And then based on that, you have the bracket that is slotted and guaranteed in this 5-7 format. Nick Saban, live on ESPN, as Reese Davis unveils the final spot. It ends up being SMU, and they go straight to Saban, and they ask him about the SEC, strength of schedule versus what we saw from SMU and the ACC. And he gives his thoughts on that, plus some coaches that are complaining about being left out of the college football playoff.
I think one of the things that I've mentioned, throughout this football season is if we don't take strength of schedule into consideration, is there any benefit to scheduling really good teams in the future? Like, here at Alabama, we're supposed to play Notre Dame, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Florida State in the future outside the league. Well, those are great games for fans to see, and that's what I think we should be doing. In college football is creating more good inventory for great games that people are interested in. But do you enhance people wanting to do that, where what's the athletic director going to do? He may go cancel all those games now, knowing that the SEC is tough enough. But at the same time, I do think the best teams are in the playoff, which I think is most important. And no coach should have any complaint about what his circumstance is relative to getting in the playoffs or out of the playoffs, because they all controlled their own destiny and they all had opportunities and they had some flaws and bad losses that contributed to their circumstance. So this could be a learning lesson for each and every team and every individual on those teams.
I like what he said there. And it's the first response reaction. Rhett Lashley did a great job after losing to Clemson by 3. Great game. The fact that they came from behind and made that run. By the way, that factored in. Ward Manuel admitted that. He put this out after knowing that SMU was going to get in. We're very grateful, very excited that the entire body of work was rewarded. What we've been told was honored. I do think strength of schedule is a big deal, but if you look at our non-conference strength of schedule, I think we did pretty good. That's true compared to Alabama's non-conference strength of schedule. They played Wisconsin and, a bunch of teams that you wouldn't tune in to watch. It wasn't great. It was one of the worst, I think, in Power 4.
That didn't stop Greg Byrne, though,
Greg Byrne
from weighing in.
Jumps right back in because, if you're looking at the conference to conference, it's obvious which conference is more difficult to run the gauntlet. And he put this out on social media. And the key with all this is going to be the middle paragraph. And he says, disappointed with the outcome, but he goes on to say, we have said that we would need to see how strength of schedule would be evaluated by the college football playoff. With this outcome, we'll need to assess how many Power 4 non-conference games make sense in the future to put us in the best position to participate in the college football playoff. That is not good for college football.
Oh, is that a threat, Greg? Sounds like a threat to me, Greg.
Well, we'll certainly.
You'll have your precious early season game now against Mercer instead of that game at Wisconsin television networks that we take millions of dollars from to play these games.
They scheduled Florida State before Florida State was this version of Florida State. They've got a home and home coming up. They have Notre Dame and Ohio State over the next 6 years. I want to see those games. So I don't want what he's saying. I'm echoing. I don't want those to go away. But the debate came down to one loss and an unbeaten team in their conference going into the championship game for SMU versus a program and a team that, while they lost to Tennessee, they also lost to Vanderbilt and they lost to Oklahoma most recently. Here's what Ward Manuel, who's the chairman of the College Football Playoff Committee, had to say about the debate within the room between the two programs.
Your debate on television really sums up the debate in the room. We looked at the number of wins that Alabama had against ranked opponents. We looked at SMU's schedule, and they were undefeated in conference. Their losses were to ranked teams. But we also looked at Alabama's loss to unranked teams. And it was quite a debate. I mean, we value strength of schedule. That's why Alabama, as a 3-loss team, is ranked ahead of other teams that have 2 losses. It is something that we talk about quite a bit, but in the balance of it, in the way SMU played in that game, losing on the last-second field goal, great win by Clemson, great game. We just felt that in this particular case, SMU still had the nod at 10 above Alabama, but it's no disrespect to Alabama's strength of schedule. It's merely looking at the entire body of work for both teams.
It's human nature, Ward, to focus on that last spot. We do it every year, whether it's 4 teams or 12 teams. But we just put a graphic up on the screen that also included Indiana. I know the way the committee goes about ordering and ranking these teams once you get to the various steps. You often wind up with 3 teams. Did Indiana ever come under the same type of scrutiny that SMU and Alabama did relative to each other, relative to those 3 teams?
Absolutely. We did that the week prior. We did it this week. We talked about where teams are and looked at their schedule again, looked at who they played, who they beat, how they played in those games in terms of their schedule and their strength of schedule. All of those things were discussed quite heavily, actually, in the grouping of those teams as you look at them and how they came out to be ranked.
And, I mean, we were told last week how the committee felt about this. It's not like they were assessing strength of schedule this past weekend. They had already made up their mind that SMU was ranked ahead of Alabama, and so was Indiana. But Ward Manuel's the athletic director at Michigan. Knowing what the discussion was like within the room, what information is he taking back to his athletic program, to his football program, and what advice is he bringing as he talks with his coaches, coaching staff, and those above him whenever he's putting together a schedule and a home-and-home series potentially? Well, here's what he had to say.
And as an AD, I would just say to athletic directors, you have to schedule the games that you need to schedule in the non-conference that you feel is best for your team, for your fan base. I look forward. We played Texas this year. I don't lament the fact that we played Texas at home. I'm not going to lament that we have Oklahoma away next year as an athletic director. I look forward to those games. And if we do well, it will give us a boost. And if we don't, then we have to reconvene and relook at the way the season's going, and we have to play the games that are in front of us and win the games you're slated to win. You should win on paper, and then play those other games as they come. But it's not, I want to just make sure everybody understands we value people's strength of schedule. Again, Alabama is 3 losses. They're ranked 11th in the country. We have to seed them the way we're asked to seed them. But Alabama is the 11th ranked team in the country with a strong schedule, even with some unranked losses.
And there it is. It's the format more than it is how they view Alabama, who has 6 wins this season against bowl-eligible teams. Guess what? So does SMU. That's the same number as Oregon, Georgia, and Penn State. I'll throw Ohio State in there, too. That's also where they are. 6 wins against teams playing one more game this season. That's more than Indiana. That's more than Arizona State. That's more than Tennessee. That's more than Clemson, who is the whole reason why we are where we are and Bama's not in. But I don't hate this as much as I lean towards Bama being the better program and the better team, but not by much. Alabama's record, Chad, against Power 4 teams with at least 7 wins, combined with the group of 5 opponents with 8 or more wins. 5 of those. SMU also won 5 of those games. Only Notre Dame and Georgia have more. So, as long as the committee stood by what they said and didn't drop SMU behind Bama because of the loss over the weekend, they were going to be in and Bama was going to be out. But overall, the most egregious aspect of this is Oregon. I don't know why Oregon and Penn State played that game. The loser benefits. And the number 1 seed has the toughest path it's not on the playoff committee. It's on those that formed this format. It's a flawed system. I don't know if they can change it over one off season. They voted this through for 2 years. They can change whatever they want to. I hope they do. Get the top teams in America and allow the 4 best teams to get the bye. I don't know the process that goes into that, Chad, but Sankey was a part of this process. He helped set this up. So it's hard to hear complaining about it now.
There's always certain things, certain elements, aspects of anything you do for the first time that once you say it initially, it's like, okay, that makes sense. Let's reward conference championship games and conference champions by doing this. And then you see it happen actually in practice, and immediately almost everyone responded negatively and said, let's do away with that. Let's just go 1 through 12 in the bracket. And hopefully they change some of the things with that automatic bye, with that conference champion moving forward. That should happen. I have no objections to much of anything that the committee did. That surprises me, but I really don't. They didn't show the Bama bias. I thought that they would. So I've got no big objections, which is what surprises me that I'm still so pissed off today, not having any objections to this. And I'm pissed off for a number of reasons, and I'll start to go through some of them. One, Kirk Herbstreit and ESPN. Let's not treat this like someone died. Okay, it was a little too self-serious yesterday throughout. Boy, just somebody, there's just no good way, guys. There's just nothing. Kirk Herbstreit's asked at the end of the broadcast by Mike Greenberg, what's your opinion on what happened to Florida State last year and then what happened this year, SMU and Bama? And he says something like, I don't have an opinion because FSU Twitter was mean and death threats, and I don't think anything about anything. Dude, you got one of the best jobs in the world. Like, you're going to get criticized when you take a strong stance on something. That's fine. It doesn't have to be so self-serious. Everyone there can take criticism. Kirk Herbstreit had no problem criticizing Booger McFarland for lobbing a joke at Alabama about, are they going to go with the brand or are they going to go with what happened on the field with SMU? Kirk Herbstreit shook his head immediately and scolded Booger McFarland for saying that. And Booger just weakly on air says, oh, you're right. I was just joking. It's low-hanging fruit. I mean, come on. Everyone thought, almost everyone did, that the SEC was going to get the benefit of the doubt. And namely, big, bad Alabama was going to get the benefit of the doubt. That didn't happen. And what's been exposed in all of this is a lot of SEC sunshine pumpers that have been going throughout, a lot of Bama pumpers that have been doing this throughout. Of course, their AD, who works for the university, is one of them. But then on the flip side of this, a lot of people are exposed with an anti-SEC bias because Jim Nagy, who we have on the show every week, posts this. And anyone with a working brain knows what he's saying here. As someone with access to college tape and staff of 11 former NFL scouts that logged hundreds of hours evaluating this college football season, it's easy to see why SEC coaches are upset with final playoff bracket. Based strictly off future NFL talent, Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss, and you can even throw in Florida, A&M, and LSU for that matter, are all easily in top 12. SEC ADs now have no incentive for scheduling tough non-conference opponents moving forward, which is too bad for college fans. Look, he's not saying those teams belong in over 4 teams that are in the bracket based on the rules that are set up. He's simply stating the obvious. These teams will put in more NFL draft picks because he's the damn expert of it than some other teams that are in the bracket. It's not that hard to follow. They have more NFL talent. Doesn't mean they're more deserving. Doesn't mean they had the better season. So that's one thing. And everybody comes after Jim, and it's ridiculous because they're acting like Jim's saying South Carolina and A&M and all these teams belong in. It should be the SEC Invitational. Not what he's saying. He's talking strictly about NFL talent on the roster. So that's one that bothers me. And Greg Burns' tweet, we can throw it back up there because Community Notes at X pointed this out also at the end of it. All of Alabama's losses came in conference play. Alabama's non-conference schedule is one of the easiest in the country, playing 2 Group of 5 schools, Western Kentucky and USF, and an FCS school that was Mercer. He also played at Wisconsin against maybe the worst Badgers team since Barry Alvarez started roaming the sideline in 1990. That team sucked, and they beat them on the road. Great. Congrats. Greg, if you would have played a Notre Dame or Florida State or someone you're scheduled to play and lost, and then not lost to Vanderbilt or lost by 3 touchdowns to Oklahoma, then you have this argument. Then if you're left out because you have a loss on the road to a great non-conference game you scheduled, not the league office, then you have an argument. This doesn't hold any water for Alabama. I agree with what he's saying for everyone else. You probably do need to look at it and say, well, if we just schedule 4 cupcakes because the SEC is so tough, those 8 other conference games, then if we can survive those with 2 losses, then we can get in the playoff. I get it. And every AD is going to have to make their own decisions in regards to that. But to act like a tough non-conference schedule is what did Alabama in is ridiculous. Please stop with the tears over this. If you split between Oklahoma and Vandy, you're easily in the playoff. And it's not just that you lost to Oklahoma. You scored 3 points and lost 24-3 in a game that wasn't even that close. I just don't see where Alabama has an argument in this whole thing because of that. And it just exposes Hutton once again, this constant, eternal tug of war between people not acknowledging that the SEC is the best conference in college football, which it is. I hate to explain this to the SEC haters of the world. It's the best conference in college football. If you can't admit that, we can't even have a conversation. And then on the flip side of that, people in the SEC now coming back and, all right, we're not going to schedule anyone tough. And in fact, we should play 6 or 7 conference games because this league is so tough. Come on.
Well, they're never going to do that.
But DBAP, SEC, or anyone who's saying that too.
Well, so, I mean, it's just the SEC schedule is not created equal.
No.
And that's just a flaw in their system.
And it's worse now with Texas and Oklahoma coming in, just like it's worse with the 18-team Big Ten with the imbalanced schedules.
I mean,
and by the way, if you have 6 or 7 games, that discrepancy gets even worse.
Yeah.
Think about all the imbalanced schedules if you get 6 games, and 6 of the 7 are against the bottom 7 teams.
They won't go to 6 because of the billions that they're making off of ESPN.
Yeah.
The remedy to this, for me, is the exact argument that the Big Ten and the SEC made as to why they're getting more of the college football playoff pie, more of the cut. In some cases, 12 million, 15 million more than some teams and some conferences. Chad, when they move to 16, we will see 4 automatic bids for those 2 conferences. That will settle this whole, is it strength of schedule or is it just wins and losses? And you settle that based on your conference standing. You're going to play that schedule. But then therein lies the flaw in that system, because the Big Ten and the SEC schedules are not created equal. So you just have to wait on the calendar to roll in your favor, and then you play it out. But what you can't do is what Alabama did. Yes, they are ranked by the committee as one of the top 12 teams in America. They have 3 losses. You can't go lose to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. And I shouldn't even be mentioning Vanderbilt, because that's helping Tennessee's argument, by the way. Their win over Vanderbilt, who beat Bama.
It's helping Texas's argument, too.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm saying don't lose to Vanderbilt. I mean, that's helping a lot of the other SEC fans' argument as to why they wanted to be in. But Oklahoma, you can't lose that game, especially late in the season. Ward Manuel said on the post comments following the bracket announcement that they will weigh end of season heavily. They're allowed to do that. And you can't go on the road and lose that game to Oklahoma. Not when SMU is winning games, and that's not their fault that they're playing teams, oh, by the way, that are top 25 teams in Pitt. They're playing, let's see, Boston College, who's pulling upsets earlier in the season.
Louisville, right? I
They
think
beat
played
Louisville. Yeah, they beat Louisville. I mean, there are a lot of factors.
They also scheduled BYU and TCU,
right,
which is tougher than most SEC programs would have scheduled non-conference.
It's tougher than Alabama's non-conference schedule.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of facts that go into the argument for SMU that I understand with what they're looking at. You know, they played BYU, TCU, Nevada, and Holy Cross. Alabama played Western Kentucky. They played South Florida and were lucky to win that game. It's 14-13 going into the fourth quarter. Wisconsin, and then played Mercer. So at best, that's a wash for Bama. But honestly, SMU's is more impressive in all of that. So I view it as you've got Ward Manuel saying, yeah, we know it's a flawed system. We put Bama behind SMU like they had the week prior. And they told everyone, I didn't buy it. They told congrats to Barrett Sallee. They told everyone that you would not be penalized for playing in a conference championship game. But Ward Manuel also said, Reese Davis, I thought had a great question, Chad, about you're sitting in the room, you guys are watching that game. In the first half, are you thinking, they're about to fall behind Bama? And while he didn't come out directly and say it, he focused on the second half and said, yeah, the way they came back and showed what type of team they are and made that a game when they're down big, it showed us that they're ranked where they should be. So, yes, it played a factor. And I don't blame them for what they ended up doing there.
No, I can't. Again, I have no big objection to anything the committee ended up doing. I can nitpick and go back, and I'm sure you can play the clips of me complaining about things they did leading up in the weeks leading up to it.
Yeah.
But I've got the end result. I've got no big issue with it. I got no big issue with Alabama being the first team out also. I think they're a talented team. I think, they won, obviously, some big games. The biggest was against Georgia, which, by the way, at the end of the season, I'm left saying, it's no doubter, Georgia's the best team in the SEC by a mile. When you look at them navigating the road schedule they navigated, and then to get to that point and beat Texas for a second time with a backup quarterback.
It was a gauntlet, yeah.
The entire second half and overtime.
Beat them twice.
Once again, we're left, all the arrests, everything in the offseason, doesn't matter. They lose a couple games, and Georgia's right there. Here's the lesson, though, and Nick Saban kind of got to this also about what you can control. With Alabama's resume in particular, again, you can have a mulligan, right? Tennessee went to Arkansas and couldn't score and lost 19-14 in a game they were ahead in the second half and should have won. Every team out there, you got that one bad performance. Ohio State versus Michigan. There's your mulligan. You can lose at Oregon when that happens. If you're Tennessee, you can lose at Georgia. If you're Alabama, it's no crime to go to Knoxville and lose against a playoff team in Tennessee. You don't get 2 mulligans. Just mathematically, if we're looking at what it's going to take to get in the playoff in the SEC or the Big Ten, they'll give you one. They'll give you 1 mulligan, and you get 1 legitimate, understandable loss, especially when you go on the road in this conference. Don't have 2 of them. If you split Oklahoma and Vandy, you could lose 1 of them, fine. Even looking as bad as you did against Oklahoma, and they would have been squarely in the 12-team bracket.
Well, they were allowed to have those mulligans, though, had SMU won the championship.
Yeah, they would have been in.
They've been in. So they made their statement with the committee.
I'm not saying it's an absolute disqualifier to have 2 mulligans. My point is, if you don't want to be in this position where you're bitching and moaning that when the bracket is released about it, then you can't have those. Now, yes, there's going to be a 3-loss team in here at some point. There's going to be some weird circumstances. I bet the SEC is going to have an Indiana one year. They're going to have a team that the top half of the conference is going to be way better than the bottom, and some team is going to feast on the bottom 6 or 7 teams with a favorable schedule.
That would have been Missouri this year.
Yep, and they're going to lose 1 game. It could be a Kentucky. It could be an Arkansas. Could be Mississippi State one year.
Yep.
They're going to get the favorable schedule, and they're going to end up in the 12-team bracket or a 16-team bracket for that reason. It's going to balance out. Hutton, I agree with you that one way it's going to balance out is when they expand. Both the big conferences are getting 4 apiece.
Yeah, and look, the other thing they didn't do, Chad, is they didn't serve the network with the scenario that I brought up last week about, hey, if you put Bama in and you're at Penn State, you're guaranteed a bigger brand no matter what happens in the outcome of the first round in the quarterfinal against Boise. And now they could have SMU against Boise in a massive, money-type game that is going to affect – they want the ratings to be huge. Mm-hmm. And they will be. But we were discussing, Tennessee, Ohio State, Bama on the road against Penn State. There was a lot of intrigue with these, on paper matchups with the big brands. They didn't do that, and I'm glad. I mean, I'm surprised by that too. I'm more surprised by that aspect. That's what I would be saying today is what they did, and it had Bama been in. Well, not the Bama bias. It's the network bias.
Well, the other thing that does not serve the network well is what Greg Byrne is saying. If all these ADs are getting together and saying, guys, we got to pay ourselves out, buy out of these games and not play these big non-conference, because Tennessee, NC State is on ESPN. Alabama at Wisconsin this year is on Fox, who's a big broadcast partner of the Big Ten.
Yep.
These networks benefit big time from these early season gigantic matchups. I think Texas-Michigan was on Big Noon Kickoff this year at Michigan.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, think about if those games suddenly go away.
Well, I don't know if they go away.
Those first 4 weeks are going to be way worse.
I don't know if they go away. They go to neutral sites. They go back to, and I hate that.
I think what Greg
vanilla.
Byrne is talking about is it's the kill switch scenario of it's not even a neutral site game. Tennessee opens next year in Atlanta against Syracuse, for an example.
Yeah.
If a team in the SEC were to lose that game, then suddenly they're going to be saying, oh, well, that was our 3rd loss, and if we just had a cupcake nobody in that game, we'd have 2 losses, and then again, this scenario does not apply to Alabama this year, which is why it's funny that Greg Byrne's bringing it up. It will apply to someone if you continue to play these behemoth non-conference games.
Because you can't. Going back to your point, though, he knows he doesn't have the mulligan if 2 teams. If you have the 16th team jump into the automatic qualifier, you've got the conference champ there in Clemson. I think he's just looking at the committee's telling us it. But keep in mind, the committee changes over. I think there's 4 or 5 committee members that are on year 3. That's a 3-year rotation. But the professor in sports media will still be on this too.
This is not the soldier for the war this year in Alabama. And that's the point I want to get to, because if they had Georgia's schedule and lost 3, I would understand it. If those games
this isn't the year for Bama to make the argument.
It's Vandy and Oklahoma. this year that were very mediocre. That again, if they would have played at Georgia or at an Ole Miss and lost, like I get it, then you're arguing about Georgia's schedule on the road this year is the perfect example. Then we're having that discussion. You can't get those 2 losses.
Well,
you can get one of the 2, but not both.
At this time last week, we were discussing the Bama bias over Miami. And the reason for Miami being behind them are the recent losses. Well, they lose 2 out of the last 4 weeks of the season, 3 out of the last 5, something like that.
Their 2 losses were Georgia Tech and Syracuse in 2 of the last 3 weeks.
2 of the last 3. So, so was Bama's loss to Oklahoma was the same way, but they still value the Crimson Tide far more. If we could put the rankings back up, the full top 25, look at where all the SEC teams are. Ole Miss and South Carolina are right there. How do you feel if you're South Carolina? You just beat Clemson on the road, and now they're ranked 16th, and they're getting in. BYU sits right behind them. Again, they're in the playoff. They're in the hypothetical bye all season long. And they're looking ahead, not at the SEC, but at 16th ranked Clemson, who wins the ACC over SMU. There are a lot of other factors. You mentioned Iowa State, who had a chance to do it too. But, they value the SEC. They just don't value this season of the SEC. And I think it was far more competitive than what they are getting credit for, the SEC, I'm saying.
Yeah.
But, yeah, if you can't lose certain games in your conference on a competitive league, I can't blame ADs that are saying with the monetary, the influx of cash that we're going to get as a team going to all these games. If we're going to get in and we can play, the same type of ACC program instead of going on the road to the Big Ten, sign us up. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Wake Forest on the schedule. It's going to suck.
I don't want those games to go away either. And I think everyone's going to sleep easier at night if everybody just admits that the SEC is the best conference in college football and they've got the most balance top to bottom. Now, everyone who knows that and anyone that supports an SEC team also has to admit that does not give you carte blanche to lose to Vandy and Oklahoma and still deserve a spot over a 2-loss team that's scheduled tough in the non-conference and lost a heartbreaker in their conference championship game. Yeah. Both of those things can be true.
You know what we're about to have, though? I think we're about to have those that are like, yes, Bama's out. The SEC has only 3 teams. Once you get to the Sweet 16 in the basketball tournament, you want the bigger brands to advance. Because we see some boat race games in the Final Four when that doesn't happen. So, which is it? I think we'll have that feeling a bit this year. What you make of Penn State benefiting from the loss? That just jumped out immediately. With the path.
I thought offensively they played way better than I expected. So let me start there. Scoring 37 points against that Oregon defense,
After being down 28-10.
Was impressive. But I think they scored in their first 5 drives, Oregon did.
They did.
They also could not stop Oregon. It's just the way it fell with the rankings that they benefit. It wasn't like the committee went in and said, we're going to give Penn State the benefit over Oregon. It just fell out that way.
This is a layup.
It's just luck. James Franklin, very, very fortunate that it fell out this way. Penn State, Texas, looking at that bracket, they've got the best route to get to the semis.
I think Texas has a more difficult route than people perceive it to be. The hottest team in America right now is Arizona State. Now they could cool off in 3 weeks. We've got to wait a while here. But Clemson with Dabo, I don't put it past Clemson to go in there and surprise Texas.
To end this on this discussion, we're going to talk to Bobby Carpenter about it too.
Yeah,
but on a big positive, all of this has been excellent.
Oh, absolutely.
The discussion, the week-to-week drama, the bracket unveiling yesterday was great theater to watch unfold in real time, watching it as it happened. The fact we're going to get these late December games on college campuses, it's terrific.
And in the weather.
The whole thing is a huge, huge boost to the sport.
And the weather. The
it's
weather
amazing.
playing a factor is going to be awesome.
And the possibility of those quarterfinal and semifinal matchups that you see down the road,
yeah, man,
as good as the first round's going to be, terrific.